We're lucky that the painting survived.
Zach came to me one day and said, look, I've got a star student in Auburn prison.
For him, Libba Cotten kind of epitomized the idea of coming from humble circumstances.
As a little girl, to know that your great-great-grandmother just won this Grammy Award, that was something that was so magnificent to us.
His art was about a reality he lived and other people of color lived as well.
Granny's legacy, Libba Cotten's legacy will continue to live.
And that eventually that recognition comes. I don't think it came in time for Joel to smell the roses.
So I had a phone call from a gentleman named Bruce Block. Bruce runs Antique Underground. So he called me one afternoon and said, you know, I've got this piece of artwork and you might want to use it for a Black History Month celebration or commemoration. It was this incredible portrait of Libba Cotten. As we got into learning more about the artist, we discovered we already had information in our research centers with some newspaper clippings about Joel Gaines. And Joel's story just, you know, sort of elevated it even more. When you look at this piece, right, you know that it's someone who has lived a life. That, you know, there's clearly a tie to music. There's clearly, you know, a life history in her face and her expression. Within a year of receiving the painting and accepting it into our collection, we knew that it needed to have some conservation treatment. And of course, as we were thinking about how we would utilize the Libba Cotten painting and telling the story of Joel Gaines in particular, we knew that this was the perfect grant to submit to GHHN. It had some water damage. It wasn't framed. It was a canvas spread out, but it was not something that you would say is ready to be placed into an exhibition.
The painting came in dirty. It came in with a bad frame. The frame is probably not original. It was only 3 pieces. The main thing was cleaning the painting, both front and reverse, replacing the frame. You can see there's a small little canvas distortion right there, but generally making sure that it's stable and clean. So the first step will be cleaning the reverse of this canvas. So I have a HEPA vac down below here, and a small, very small kind of bristle attachment that allows me to kind of fine-tune the vacuuming process. And it's mostly kind of like old dirt and grime. So I'll be, slowly and methodically kind of like removing all this dirt and grime. This was painted in 1983, and we find that sometimes it takes 100 years or more for oil paint to be fully hardened so that you can clean it without sensitivity issues. On something like this from 1983, that oil paint is still a baby. It's still cross-linking. These little highlighted glowing areas are accretions deposits from the painting, getting dirty. And in fact, there's this giant drip running down the canvas. So it's generally just dirty, it's filthy, but it's not in terrible condition. It's reasonably stable. With aqueous cleaning, there's a lot of different solutions that we use and we'll test. The bubbles can actually be a nice little component to help lift dirt and grime. It's one of the most gentle ways of cleaning a painting. So my testing showed that the only thing that I could really safely use was sparkling water. Joel Gaines' technique, there's this impressionistic kind of stylized aspect to these paintings that is really lovely. Some of his early paintings, because he was in jail and he probably didn't have great art materials, he didn't have like traditional studio materials, he kind of painted with whatever he could find. And that can often be problematic when it comes to conservation. Once he was out of jail in the late 70s, he was a student at SU and took art classes and was trained in kind of more traditional studio techniques. And I think that was probably using more traditional artist materials. And this painting is from '83, so it's in that more traditional kind of studio environment. His subject matter is still incredible, and that doesn't change.
Libba Cotten's life is an incredible, it's a movie. Her grandparents had been enslaved. I mean, we're only a few decades after the American Civil War is over. She grows up in a home where music is everywhere. Just imagine this young African-American girl in Chapel Hill. This is sharecroppers everywhere. Her mother's a domestic worker. Her father's a miner, so hard work and music clearly is sort of a glue that binds the family. And you can imagine sort of the generational trauma and the poverty that surrounds them. Music really seems to be a life raft for Libba.
The type of music that she played was frowned upon among church people. And so essentially what happened was Granny had decided to dedicate more of her life towards the church.
In her teenage years, when she got married, that's when she totally stopped and started focusing more on domestic work.
She ends up getting divorced from her husband, and she eventually finds her way to Washington, D.C. She works as a clerk in a department store called Landsberg's. Sometime in the mid to late 1940s, she's working in Landsberg's, and as the story goes, a young Seeger child, right, comes in, and she basically is lost.
See, I was always getting lost. I was wandering off everywhere. And this very lovely, statuesque black woman found me, and she took me to the Lost and Found. And she stayed there with me because we bonded right away. And my mother came and found me, and my mother started talking to Libba. She had 4 children, and she desperately needed some help. So Libba came to work for us on Saturdays. And she was a fantastic cook. She loved us kids. She got her name from my sister Penny, who at that time would have been about 3 or 4. Penny couldn't say Elizabeth, so she called her Libba. So I would probably have been about 14, maybe 15, when I walked into the kitchen, and there was Libba playing the guitar. And I do remember she was very embarrassed because you didn't take down a guitar off the wall in the place that you were working. And Mike came in, and we're just both sitting there absolutely gobsmacked. And then Libba started singing. She was singing songs that we'd never heard before. And Freight Train was one of them.
Freight train, run so fast. Freight train, run so fast.
I did notice that she was playing the guitar what I would call backwards. She had turned it around so that her right hand was playing the chords and her left hand was fingering the strings.
So she would, while fingering a chord, she could pick the bass notes, but with her index finger. She'd be using this index finger to play the notes. And if you listen to her songs, you can hear that the bass really sounds really sharp. That's because she's picking up. And then she's doing these rolls with her fingers, and it's just sort of alternating. Yeah, this when I first went over to meet Johnine and met Elizabeth. That was the first song. I sat down and played it for her.
Amazing.
It was like, she goes, I want to hear you play Freight Train. I had answered a note on the bulletin board that was from Johnine saying that she was looking for someone to help develop material. Johnine was Elizabeth's granddaughter. I believe that I was there as much as anything to make their load lighter, did the driving, made sure guitars were in tune, just all the logistical things that you'd have to deal with, especially being on the road with an elderly person. I mean, she was in her 90s at that time, so, You know, it was more like a familial relationship. They called it Granny. So, you know, I think people that went to that house were always felt like they were welcomed.
I had a very close friend who was an artist. His name was Jack White. Jack was teaching art at Auburn Prison. Joel was a student in one of his classes. Jack came to me one day and said, look, I've got a star student in Auburn Prison who's going to be a star one day, and I need your help. Well, at that time, I was serving as director of HOP at Syracuse. It was a commitment I had to make to employ him that was the key factor for getting him released. But over several months we got it done, and eventually I hired Joel as a counselor. Joel was a very quiet person, very methodical. I guess prison had probably helped him become sort of routine. I mean, if you could expect him to be there at 8 o'clock, not 5 minutes before or after, but 8 o'clock. You could expect him to take lunch exactly at 12:02, not 12:03. The students that he worked with loved him and they respected him, and he taught them not only art but character. Joel was very connected with the Black and Latino art community in this area. And during the 80s and 90s, that artwork flourished. It was popular throughout the central New York area. Another ceramist by the name of David McDonald, who was a faculty person on the campus, he and Joel became close.
Joel was one of the artists that was associated with the early years of the Community Folk Arts Center. There was the professional artist, and then there were the non-professional artists or community artists. And one of the missions of the Community Folk Arts Center was to try and give those artists in the community a place to show their work. Generally, Joel was considered one of the community artists, you know, maybe talented, a little rough around the edges, you know, not quite as sophisticated as many of the people who go through the academy. The use of profanity, broken grammar, in your face when he disagreed with you, you know. He wasn't a very diplomatic person.
I just thought he was a dusty little guy that I found out he was an artist, and he fit my image of who starving artists were. I had this big house, it needed decorations. So I asked him if I could borrow the work for this reception I was having at my house. He came to me, he said, I gotta go out of town and I don't have any money. So you can have 7 of the pieces. So I bought them. And those were my first real pieces of art.
He most certainly was hardworking in terms of just producing lots and lots of work.
So we're going to be varnishing the painting. I'm going to be using Regal Res varnish, which is a perfect varnish to use on this paint that's sensitive. There's some small cracking around some of the impact areas that could use some consolidation, so the varnish will act as a consolidant. The varnish will also nicely saturate the paintings. Contrast will be boosted, the colors will pop, so it will transform the painting. The varnish we're using has a wax component, so we actually use a double boiler to bring it up to temperature. It dissolves the wax. It looks milky otherwise. So this is basically ready to go. When it came to retouch an oil painting, you pull out your oil paints. Removing oil paint from an oil painting is very challenging, especially if the restoration retouch is bad and it needs to come off. A lot of paintings have been completely overpainted by restorers. I don't ever want to leave evidence that I've been there. Obviously I do. I'm leaving retouch, but I almost want it to be invisible what we do. One of his intentions was less focus on the guitar and more focus on her head and her hat, which is part of why he painted that hat. It's a really interesting observation because it's such a vertical painting. Your eye does immediately go to her face. And I think that's a really amazing element of the painting is you have the mind of this woman and then her incredible skill. And so the artist, I think, understood, and by creating this vertical format, he did like two places that are really important to tell the story of Libba Cotten.
So as she evolved, she started to get older. The traveling and everything was weighing a toll on her.
Her grandsons had moved to Syracuse, and he had suggested that she move from DC to Syracuse.
When she moved, that's when the accolades started to come in. Granny was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in the year 2022. And there was a lot of other famous people in there as well, like the Eurythmics, which is pretty cool.
She wins the Grammy for her live album. She's a machine. It's just undeniable. Right? Libba Cotten is undeniable.
As a little girl, to know that your great-great-grandmother just won this Grammy Award, that was something that was so magnificent to us.
I think that she was happy for being recognized, but on the other hand, I think she also had this feeling like, why are you making such a big deal about me? I really think, she was humble. She didn't put on airs.
The influence that she has in the 80s, the Grateful Dead were really, hitting all their strides. And Jerry Garcia, who basically re-recorded a version of Sugar-E and Oh Baby It Ain't No Lie to basically give Libba some money, right? Which was something that had not necessarily come with all of the fame and the touring. And so Jerry had been in and out of Syracuse quite a bit, both in Jerry Garcia Band and in the Grateful Dead. And as the stories go, he would go and visit Libba at her home and hang out, which is amazing. I wish there was footage of that.
Granny is loved throughout the world. So she was one of those people who were able to unify people. When you think about racism, and even back then in like the 1900s, the early 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, Granny was able to navigate the folk industry. And not only that, but she was a leader among it, a woman.
The Syracuse loved her. Not only that, the state of New York loved her.
Libba Cotten means a great deal to Syracuse. Obviously there's a park named after her on the south side of the city, Libba Cotten Grove, which is a sort of a green oasis in the middle of the concrete jungle part of Syracuse. Libba's legacy seems to have grown and continues to grow, which is incredible considering she's been gone for almost 40 years now.
After she passed away, her legacy still continues to live. And I know that even past us, when we go away, Granny's legacy, Libba Cotten's legacy will continue to live.
We're lucky that the painting survived. Somebody recognized its value and kept it. And again, this will allow perhaps some more light to be shown on Joel's life as well and the art that he created.
He was a prolific artist, and so he was working hard to get recognized. And I think for him, Libba Cotten kind of epitomized the idea of coming from humble circumstances and having the fortitude and passion to continue to do your art even though you're not getting any recognition, and that eventually that recognition comes. Sometimes it comes too late, it comes posthumously, and sometimes it does come in time for you to smell the roses. I don't think it came in time for Joel to smell the roses.
Joel Gaines came to me with this, if I remember correctly, a brown paper and said, I just want to share this with you. He ripped the paper off, and this is the painting that he had done for me, including the frame itself, and said, this is a vision that you gave me several years ago, and I want to share with you that you showed me the openness to my happiness and my new artwork. If you look through this pathway, there's an opening right at the end of this piece of work. And that opening is that vision that he was sharing with me, that the new vision that he has of his future.
Social and political situation was, not ideal for African Americans. Although there had been some legislation, still there was the systemic results of years of segregation and racial discrimination. And so I felt that a lot of his work was about trying to speak about the nobility of being a common person, and also the struggles that Black people, how they survive. You may see somebody on the street that, you would cross the street so that you would avoid them, and those were the kind of people that I think Joel gravitated to, people that were struggling in life, because he struggled in life most certainly, and I think his art was more about trying to express the nobility of the human spirit.
This is the finished painting at this point. There's always some stories, but I feel like this one has a richer story than most paintings. The frame was probably one of the final elements, and it's always such a satisfaction to put on the frame, put on the correct hardware so that it's well attached to the stretcher. The frame is also carrying the weight, so the hanging hardware hangs off the frame. When this came in, it was hanging off of the stretcher. Clients come in and they have stories of their own about, who painted it, how they inherited it, where they purchased it. I don't necessarily need to know the backstory. I think it makes for a richer experience when you do, and it's definitely very rewarding when you do know those backstories.
Within Granny, her story is phenomenal. And just like Professor Gaines, it's the same thing. From my understanding, it was inspiration through Granny in terms of having a second chance that caused him motivation to do what he was doing, which was paint. Just to bring the whole story together in terms of evolving, having faith and perseverance.
tree.